All right. So, you know, we all started in aviation pretty much the same way. There's always some spark that that happens. For me, I didn't realize how ingrained aviation was in my life until I got to where I am now. My family had an office supply store when I was growing up, and we were one of the sponsors for the Portland International Air Show. And so
Good.
I got to go when I was really little, and I spent a lot of time uh, watching airplanes. We lived close to Hillsborough Airport, which had a lot of traffic, so I was always watching those. And we're under a flight path for Portland International Airport, so I got to see the airplanes flying over us all the time. I didn't realize how into it I was until we were watching home movies after I had enlisted in the military, like 2 decades later, and I have tons of airplane stuff, and I don't remember any of that. But the earliest aviation memory I have is of my first flight. I took an intro to flight. My best friend and I were a couple months apart, and we were both interested in aviation. And so our parents bought us a 30-minute discovery flight out over the gorge in Oregon, and right there at the Oregon-Washington border. And we got up there. We booked it back to back, so we both went in the same 172. And it was almost no break between his flight and my flight. I went first because he was nervous, and traffic was full, or traffic pattern was full, so we got to wait. I got a little bit extra flying time. The instructor let me not only taxi it, but take off and land. Of course, she was on the controls the whole time, but let me feel like I was doing the flying. That really sparked an interest for me seriously in aviation. I wanted to go be a pilot. Of course, I didn't want to spend the money. I didn't think that I could go to college for it because I didn't want to go into debt for that. And so I put the dream off. And about 7 or 8 years later, I got real sick of being a civilian. So I went to the recruiter's office, and I tried the Air Force first. I thought that I was still young enough. I was 23 at the time. I could hopefully get into the academy, and they told me my grades weren't good enough. So I went across the hall to the Army and talked to the guy there. I said, I just want to be involved in aviation. And I said, I'd like to fly. He goes, well, since you don't have a degree and your grades weren't that great, there is the warrant officer program you could fly, but it's better to start as an enlisted guy and then drop your packet. Of course, he was just trying to get me to sign up. So easiest way to do that was an enlisted contract. And I said, okay, what do you got for being around aircraft? He goes, well, we got a Chinook position. I said, I don't have to crawl into a tail boom for that, right? He goes, no. I said, okay, cool. I can stand up in it. Great. And he goes, yeah, and the Chinooks are more likely you'll be able to crew on it, which means you can fly even if you don't drop your packet. So I went through the basic training, went to my AIT, my advanced individual training, learned how to do my job. And I had never been mechanical in my life. I'd never had a job outside of the last job I had before the military where I had to fix things or diagnose a problem or even own a toolbox. And so it was really, I felt like it missed out on a lot of the nuances of troubleshooting and diagnostic. But really, it's not, it's different because they have to push you through, you can only be there for so long. And so I learned about optimization and really how to cram as much information into your brain as possible in the shortest amount of time to make you effective when you got to where you're supposed to be. And I got there and I realized I just really liked turning wrenches. I had no idea I'd ever like to be a mechanic until I got there. And I met a really good friend of mine who's still a good friend of mine to this day. We're actually going flying tomorrow in one of our home builds, our little experimental airplane. We haven't flown all summer. We've been grumpy about it. And so I met him, and he introduced me to the world of ultralights and experimental aviation and how inexpensive that can be. And so it ignited a new fire in me, and I decided, you know what? I'm tired of being told what to do all the time. I want to do my own thing. So about 2 months or 2 years from the end of my contract, I started planning my exit. I made specific goals about what I wanted to do when I got out, which was a very short hop over to the DoD contract side. I had a measurable timeline and things that I had to accomplish by a certain period, and I made sure that they were small, achievable steps so that I could feel like I was making progress and not get discouraged on it. And of course, making all that, it ends up being a realistic goal. You know, if you fit it within that, it's not a goal that's unachievable. It's not unrealistic. And I just followed that. I ended up going overseas to Afghanistan for right the beginning of 2020. I went over to Bagram and Kandahar, helped close down Kandahar, and 3 months after I left that contract, Afghanistan closed. I was supposed to get 90 days on, 30 days off, and it didn't happen. COVID hit, and they shut down all travel like a week before I was supposed to go home on my first rotation. And that was when I decided I didn't want to be in contracting anymore. The money was great, but I was still at the mercy of the DoD. So I thought, well, what can I do? And I've got 6 months worth of savings in my bank account. We put an offer down on a house on an airport. I'm going to be an independent mechanic. But of course, without my inspection authorization, can't do a whole lot. So I started looking around for the perfect job. Couldn't find it. There was nothing that was was less than a 2-hour commute. I didn't want to go to the airlines as much as that would have been profitable for me. It just wasn't where I felt like I fit. When I was transitioning out of the military, I was in a course that was supposed to help me get my A&P, but I had to pay out of pocket and be reimbursed for that. So I never took my tests. So I went to Baker's School of Aeronautics to finish out my tests, spent $3,000 to do that, that I just pulled out of my savings. Said, I can handle it. I'm at this point, I hadn't worked for probably 4 months by now, because I was looking for that perfect job. I wanted to work for the Columbia River Bar Pilots Association, which is right across the river from me. And they weren't hiring, and I didn't have my A&P yet. So even if they were hiring, I wouldn't have gotten the job. So I went and got my A&P, and then I got called by their head AMPIA, and he was transitioning to another career with Life Flight. And he's like, hey, before I go, I know you were wanting to, because he's the mechanic that does all the annuals for the people on my airfield that I live at. And he's like, I know you wanted to work for the bar pilots. Come on down for an interview. So I went down, I got my interview, but part of being a bar pilot was also being a hoist operator. And I kind of washed out of that program. So I left there, tried to be on the best terms, because you can never get away from aviation. And it's such a small community, especially in the rotorcraft community, that it doesn't matter where you go, you're going to run into someone who knows someone that you know. And if you leave somewhere on bad terms, you're just going to not have a good time at your next job. So then I went to work for a flight school up in Kelsos. It was almost 2 hours each way every day. I was working almost 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. I did this for one summer at this flight school, working. I was spending more in gas than I was probably making at that time. But I really enjoyed working on the little airplanes. And so then I met one of my mentors, and he has a independent network of mechanics that he started. And he collects all this information and all these maintenance tasks, and he divvies them out to mechanics all over the nation to do in their off time. And you're covered under his insurance for that. And so I started taking independent jobs. And then I got a call from probably my dream job. This was a company I was following before I even thought about the military. Columbia Helicopters, a heavy lift operation based out of Aurora. It's a great, great company to work for, at least so far. I mean, I've only been there a couple months now, but I was following them from even before I started working on helicopters and wanting to be with that company. And now I am. I'm a field mechanic. I 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So I have plenty of time to do independent work on my own. I am eligible for my inspection authorization testing in a little less than 12 months now. And I am working my way towards it. It's an amazing journey, and the people I've met along the way have just been absolutely fantastic. I hope I haven't pissed off too many people along the way, because sometimes I feel like I left on not so great terms. But you know, there's still people from every job that talk to me all the time, so I can't have done that badly. But it's all about really figuring out where you want to go and what fits you. Because I could have gone to the airlines. I could have said, well, we're not going to buy this house. We're going to go live in Seattle or Portland, close to my family or my wife's family, and I could go work for the airlines and make a lot more than I'm making now. But I had toured those places. I had toured a MRO. I toured Boeing. I toured Alaska. And while I liked the culture, it just felt too much like what I'd already done, even though it was different airframes. And I was like, you know, I want to do something completely different. I love the little airplanes, the ones that people say you can't make money in. But part of my SMART goals and part of my journey on this IA was a little market research. And the FAA's database is awesome. You can find anything in there if you know where to look, which is the hard part. But I figured out that there are several thousand aircraft owners in just a 200 nautical mile radius of me, and only about 8 maintenance facilities or independent mechanics. And so that's a huge market share that's not tapped, or that, you know, people are traveling to other places because they moved from somewhere else and they're like, well, I like my mechanic over here. So it's possible to do. You just have to make your goals. You have to figure out where you want to go. And there's no harm in jumping ship if you don't like something. I mean, I thought that the fact that I had changed jobs 3 times since 2020 was going to hurt my chances at Columbia. But they called me up. They wanted to offer me a temporary position, seasonal position on a fire contract. And I told them, well, I'm at a stable position outside of the industry right now, and I don't want to leave that. And about 45 minutes later, they called me and said, well, we talked to the program head, and they said to offer you a full-time position, even though things are tied up right now. And so, you know, I didn't think in any stretch of the imagination that I was going to make that I was going to get that offer. And now I'm here, and I have the time to come do fireside chats like this and talk about my journey and talk about how making goals has helped me get there, and how it doesn't hurt you to try different things and to go different places. And I wouldn't change it for the world. This is my dream career path, to be helping other mechanics and other pilots figure out what they want to do and get to work on the airplanes that I like to work on whenever I want to work on. So, I mean, there we go. that's my journey, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's a huge message to send to people too, is that sometimes it takes a couple times and tries to figure out right, your fit, because there are so many different paths in the industry that you can take. And, you know, like you mentioned, you could have gone to the airlines, you could have been making a lot more money and, you know, had that different life, I guess, in that direction, but you chose to follow your heart instead and didn't chase necessarily the money. But now you're in a position where, you know, I'm sure doing like all that contract work and stuff has kind of set you up probably with something comparable to the airlines. How much of a difference would you say?
I mean, just because it was 7/12s for 367 days straight and it was in a non-taxable environment, it was a six-figure income for me. And I put 20 grand in savings, but then I didn't work for 6 months. So I blew through all of that. But I mean, it showed me that if I wanted to, I could go back to it. If I just had to find the right contract, but that's not what I want to do. And I'm comfortable now. I'm not making the $40 an hour I'd make if I went to Alaska right now, but I'm making.
That's what they're paying mechanics now at the airlines. I have no idea.
Base with zero experience straight out of school right now, I think is somewhere between 28 and 32 an hour.
With how many hours? How many hours guaranteed do they give you guys a month, or what they give mechanics a month?
It's pretty much just however many hours you want to work. For most of it, it's overtime optional type places where you go and you can, if you want to work more, there's more work to be done.
Sure.
Unless you get a good line job right away.
Yeah, I was about to say, because I could imagine there is always work to be done, especially with the mechanic shortage in the industry, that there's a lot of opportunity for you guys to make more money with overtime and private contracts and things like that.
Yeah, and top out is pretty good right now too. I think the last I heard, the industry leader is UPS. Close behind is FedEx, and they're topping out after 6 years at 70 an hour. So, I mean, it's not bad.
Yeah, that's not bad. Do they do sign-on bonuses? Do you know?
Not that I've seen. Certain places are doing sign-on bonuses, like for certain bases. Like California, I see a lot of sign-on bonuses for California right now because no one wants to live there. It's too expensive.
Sure.
And the salary is not really. You're only going to be comfortable living there if you're living in something really, really cheap or splitting something with somebody. Right. But it's not terrible. There are places offering sign-on bonuses. Corporate is more likely to offer a sign-on bonus than the majors right now, I think. But
sure. Yeah, and it's so funny you mentioned like when you were a kid that you had all this aviation stuff and you didn't even remember. I saw like pictures from a camp that I went to, like I was 10 or something, and I didn't even know that was my first helicopter flight was at this camp in Tennessee. And it was such a core memory, but I didn't even remember it.
Yeah. And my mom likes to joke that besides the air shows, when she was still pregnant with me, they took a helicopter scenic ride over downtown Portland. And so she's like, it's probably that.
Probably that, definitely. You could hear it through through her belly, the sound of the helicopter. It just went into your soul. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey. Yeah, it's really cool to see different people's paths, because none of anybody that I know, nobody's path was a straight arrow. Mm-hmm. It always, they kind of bounced around here, military there, got out, went this direction and that direction and this direction until they finally landed somewhere where they were like, no, this is where I'm supposed to be. So that is a good message for people starting out of, just go with the flow, and you might have to bounce around a little bit until you find the right fit, and that's okay. And just to, enjoy all of the steps along the way. It's kind of hard sometimes, especially there might be reasons why you leave a job a little earlier than expected. Maybe the environment's not great. Maybe the pay isn't great. Maybe, the work environment is toxic and it's somewhere that you wouldn't want to be anymore for your own mental health and quality of life. And that okay to step away from those jobs early. And if someone gives you a hard time about it, just say, hey, it was a toxic work environment and it wasn't a good place for me to be at the time. And I don't know. I've left jobs early, not always on the best of terms. But I'm here also in this check airman position, and someone still, even with leaving somewhere early where maybe there was some bad blood there. Um, yeah, it doesn't mean that's like the end all to your career if that happens. So that's also a good lesson in there as well. Um, the right people will give you the time of day,
Mm.
and hopefully the people that you left aren't vindictive.
Yeah,
There's a lot of legal aspects to stuff like that too, where it's like they're not really allowed to call around and talk smack about you if you did something like that. So
yeah,
legal
yeah,
ramifications on their part.
So I'm going to jump in. One of the things that I thought was really great, because it's hard to get people to understand it, right? Is you establish the fact that you what you wanted as, and we'll just consider them like micro goals in the beginning, right? You knew there were going to have to be stepping stones that you were going to have to strive towards, and as you achieve each one of those, and then you kind of just look over the horizon again and you go, oh no, there's another stone or another step that I have to take, and that's the progressive build of a career, right? So I've been doing this almost 30 years, and I'm going to tell you, it's just like that. If you're getting into the aviation industry, or you want to be part of the aviation industry, there is no straight road that's going to take you anywhere, right? It's the way I look at people, and a lot of people, what you'll be surprised is, especially on the maintenance side of the house, a lot of people do not have goals after they've achieved their very beginning. It's very simple to go, I want to get my MP. And some people treat that as almost like a college degree. Like I did my 2 years of school, I got my AMP, I'm good. Now the world owes me, and I don't have to do anything else after this point, right? So they're not. So the fact, like, the IA is out there. There's other levels of what exists. You have other capabilities that you could build, you could self-improve of what you become, and even to set up long-term goals. I see people where they try to decide what they want to do, and what they can establish is to say, or put a foot down and just be like, hey, it's great being a mechanic and I've done it or whatever, but I don't want to be on the hangar floor at 40 years old, or I don't want to, or to jump in and say, you know what, I want to be a director of maintenance. Let me just start out there, right? Let me just set that goal and that ambition out there, to realize that, hey, by the way, people can look at it and say that, well, you're just a mechanic, you're just a wrench turner, what do you know, da da da, or whatever. But it's like, no, there's actually VPs of maintenance, there are actually directors of maintenance, there are actually executive levels that you can get within big certificate organizations, and that maintenance background is part of the beginning. And it's easy to look across the spectrum. So it's just like that. When you say top out, people top it out at $70 an hour, or people, I remember one guy I knew out in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was like, why did you become an A&P? And he was like, oh man, for the money. And I'm like, what money? It's like
yeah,
maybe we have different impressions of what money is, like, because I'm like, nobody gets into aviation for money, first of all. Like, I mean, it might be, yes, is it okay, is it decent? Yes, it's okay, but it is not like, I'm not gonna sit here and retire a millionaire because I got in the aviation industry, right?
yeah,
It's kind of like, that's not the whole thing. It's more passionate driven. Everybody is passionate about being in the industry in one way or another. But the thing is, and so he was like, he said, well, look at that guy over there, he makes, X amount, which is like in the six figures. And it's like, bro, that dude's been working here like 35 years, And so, which brings me to the next point of what you were saying, right? To find technicians with the stability in the aviation industry of today, that you can work for one employer for 20, 30, 35 years, and unless it's a hardcore union shop and established, and that's what the airlines bring, but you're going to have to pay your dues, right?
yep,
It's going to be odd work week, third shift, bottom of the totem pole, and have to sit there and work your way up. But it's almost like the industry standard now is exactly what you were saying. Oh my goodness, I had, four employers in 5 years, and who's going to like that, and da da da. You go, That's normal.
Hmm.
That is a norm within aviation. You have no idea because of the fact that either people find different aircraft, they find different employers, they find different places. There's so many different elements that come into that, right? It's not just a financially driven avenue. It's like, I don't want to work in the cold anymore. I don't want to work on a flight line anymore. I don't want to just work in a hangar anymore, or because it's just like that. You're working, in remote operations now and field environment, and that may be cool for a while. And then sometimes I just want to be in a warm hangar and relax and just work out of my toolbox. So everybody has different aspects, but they go through different flavors of life as they're working their career, and they realize that. Or I just want to go give this a try, or hey, this is a pretty cool plane, I want to go work on these for a little bit. So that's the dynamics. That's actually what's beautiful about this industry, because nothing is static. We work in such a dynamic industry that is constantly evolving, constantly changing. Technology is constantly growing, and we get exposed to stuff that people don't get to see on an everyday basis. And then they look at us like, how do you know all this? And it's like, you know, but it's great, man. But I just wanted to let you know, because of where you're sitting at, don't ever think about a negative, but your goals are awesome, man. I'm glad to see that you have your goals. Your IA, don't worry about it, man. It's gonna be there, right? It's just a test. All you gotta do is study for the test, you'll be good to go. No big deal, right? There's not even a practical. So it's
Yep.
if you studied for your AMP and you got it all together, if you want the IA, you'll get it, So that's
Madison will
cool.
get the IA. Like, when you get it, do we have to call you something like, Inspector
Inspector.
Madison, Inspector Johnson?
Yeah. Just
Yeah.
just know, man, it comes with the currency requirements, so it's a whole
Hmm.
different game now, right? Now you're
Yep.
actually watching the calendar and like, oh man, but if you're doing annuals, not such a big deal. But if you're
Yeah.
if you're out there, just got to make sure that you're checking all the blocks as you need to take care
Yeah.
of it, and protect it. It's a certificate just like any other certificate, man. You got to protect it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I tell anybody I talk to who wants to get into the industry, these certificates, they're not an end all goal, and they never will be. They are always just a ticket to learn. The day you stop learning is literally the day you die. I mean, if you stop learning before your body stops moving, then you're just brain dead. That's just the gist of it, I
Yeah.
mean,
You were talking about how, like, you go to school and it's such a lot of information in such a short period of time. You kind of just like have to get what you can while you're at school, but the real learning happens when you're out there actually doing the job and doing the work and getting your hands on these aircraft and seeing all the different things that are happening out in the fields when you start working for somebody. But yeah, it's the same thing on the pilot side too. Like, we could only teach you so much in this like short little period of time, and then flyaway birdies go actually do all of the rest of the
yeah,
learning. And I gave you my phone number. I'm already regretting it, but you can call me anytime. There's only so many hours in the day during training, but
yeah,
yeah. And once you get that certificate, it doesn't mean you know everything and that you're Mr. Big shot yet. Like, it's like you mentioned, that's just the start of a really long, beautiful career of learning and continuing to grow your craft and to grow your knowledge base, and like you mentioned, to never stop learning and to stay curious. It's so important.
yeah. I actually thought about getting a ride. So the field off the place we're at, the airfield we're at for my field position right now is down in California area, and we're on a little concrete pad that's right next to one of the taxiways, right across from the windsock on the runway. And there's this rotorcraft flight school that has little Hughes helicopters and R-22s. And the little Hughes helicopter was trying to stay out of the pattern because Navy aircraft come in, refuel there all the time. And so he was just doing auto rotations right on the taxiway and basically coming to a hover right in front of our helicopter. And I think he was trying to show off, but it was just like, man,
Probably.
I want to go get in that helicopter now and just go have
Wait,
some fun.
a pilot showing off
I know, right? In front of other pilots of a bigger
What? That's
helicopter.
so unlike us. We don't do that. What are you talking about?
I think he was just trying to get a better look at our helicopter. But
Uh,
I told him, Mike, just walk down. We'll let you look inside.
right? Just come on down, buddy. You don't have to do autos. It's like peacocking as a
Mhm.
pilot,
His
showing
autos were
off
pretty
his
good though.
feathers.
His
Huh?
instructor was pretty proud of his autos. One of the first ones he came down, it was a really nice one, and I could see because it's little tiny Hughes with the clear plexiglass doors on it. And he's like, yeah, that's great.
Heck yeah, there isn't anything better feeling than like hitting your spot just dead on, doing autos. So I know you have like flying career goals. I mean, are you ever trying to make this switch at all? Or are you gonna stick with the A&P thing forever and ever, or just personal flying goals, like you just want to get your license just for fun?
I Right now it's just a fun thing. I like flying my little ultralights, but the AMPIA that does the annuals and stuff around here that left for Life Flight, he still does the annuals for the guys that live here. But he just started up a flight school that because the airport across the river from us, Astoria, hasn't had a flight school in like 2 decades. And he and some buddies bought some airplanes and conned a independent CFI into getting back to work. And so they just opened that up officially. They start their first ground school next month, and
Okay.
it's really affordable. It's almost flight club prices. How
Oh
cheap
wow.
their instruction is. So I might actually get my fixed wing license, and then try to get my buddy, because my buddy who I fly ultralights with has his rotor license, and he was this close to finishing his CFI, but then his school went under, and he just
No.
never finished it. And he's like, I like airplanes better.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone who started in helicopters who said that, but I I think it's also really good for mechanics to even just get a PPL,
Mm-hmm.
just so they actually get some experience actually on the controls up there flying it, so that if a pilot ever says like, hey, this is happening, that they have a better understanding of what they're talking about. Also,
Yeah.
like having some actual experience behind the controls and feeling what they feel like, and if you're like, oh, the yoke feels sticky or whatever, like,
Yeah.
I don't
That
know.
was probably my favorite thing about working at the flight school that I worked at. I left it because the IA was not very good at playing with others in the sandbox. He'd been in the industry for like 50 years, and he had his own way of doing things. And if you didn't do it exactly his way, you were doing it wrong, even if you were doing it by the book. So I regretted leaving that place because I liked all the CFIs, and I really enjoyed when they would bring students into the hangar on the maintenance side of things, and because we'd have aircraft torn apart for a customer annual or whatever, and they'd be talking about how the carburetor works and how carb de-ice works, and so I'd be able to take apart and say, hey, this is what it does on the mechanic side. I know you don't need to know that much in depth for flying it, but it really helps you understand it for when you get asked that question by your
Yeah.
DME.
And it's cross training, and it makes understanding your systems. Yeah, we have step-by-step processes or step-by-step, rote memorization things for our emergency procedures, for example. And I could say, yeah, okay, step 1 is this, step 2 is that, step 3 is that, but why am I doing step 1 and step 2 and step 3? Why is that important? Why do I need to add carb heat? Why do I, and having a basic understanding of the systems, or even a more in-depth knowledge after you've kind of like been flying for a while and you're like, okay, I've had this base knowledge for a pretty long time now. I'm actually going to go Google the interior workings of a carburetor at this point and like kind of see the inner workings, be like, oh, like there's been so many of those moments kind of in the later parts of my career that I'm like, I've never looked up what a labyrinth seal is. I've just taken it for granted. I mean, I had an idea in my head. I imagined like a balloon like blowing up and sealing something, which is like absolutely not how it works. So, like, I had like zero comprehension of what a labyrinth seal was, but I had been flying aircraft that had labyrinth seals on them forever. And like, I know that P2 compressor bleed air, seals the labyrinth seals, but like, I don't freaking know what that actually looks like, And I watched a very long, boring video on labyrinth seals on YouTube that was probably done in like the 80s. And, kind of tortured myself through it. But it was I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't know this is how it worked this entire time. So, having a little bit more of an in-depth understanding kind of later on after you have all that base knowledge just grinded in your brain already, that it's never going anywhere. It's not like I'm going to forget how something works after it's been there for a very long time. But yeah, like even teaching my students now, teaching ground school at a higher level, because now I have pilots who have thousands of hours of flight time under their belt. They've been flying for, at least a decade or more. Sometimes have been flying more time than I've been born, basically. But I'll ask them an emergency procedure, and I'm like, okay, so you get a gearbox temperature light. What is that telling you? My gearbox is getting hot. Okay, well, what's the first step in that emergency procedure? Set your airspeed to 70 knots. Cool. Why are you doing that? I don't know.
Because the book says.
Because the book says, right? And I'm like, okay, well, why do you think? Like, how if your gearbox is getting hot, what cools down your gearbox? The oil cooler. Well, yeah. How does your oil cooler work? I don't know. It cools the oil. Okay, well, don't you pre-flight that every day? You get up there with the flashlight, make sure no birds made a nice home up in the cooler, blocking all the ram air coming through. Okay, so if you're slow and you don't have any airflow over your oil cooler, what is cooling your oil? Oh yeah, I've got a fan back there. Yeah. So if you're sitting still and your oil temperature is going hot, and they want you to set your airspeed to 70 knots, what are you doing? Oh, I'm getting air over the cooler. I never thought about that. How long have you been flying this aircraft? And just like, kind of, I hit on systems a lot, especially with recurrent pilots who are coming back. They've been flying this aircraft for a couple of years now. I'm like, you guys should have a little bit more of an in-depth knowledge of your systems. And I've had a lot of pilots argue, I'm not a mechanic. I don't need to know the little drop of oil story and where that little drop of oil is going. But I wholeheartedly disagree. Especially at a certain level, I expect that pilots should know how their systems actually function and why they're reacting to that warning light coming on more in depth than just a basic, like, I don't know, it's just what the book says. And which is a lot of the time the answer that I get from people. But like, I have a mechanical background. I mean, I was a mechanic in the Coast Guard, but I worked on boats. And it was actually more so I jumped on the list to go to mechanic school to get out of my current station because it was the fastest. It was the fastest way out of Cape Disappointment. Sorry, man.
That's all right. It gets old if you're stuck here. I understand.
It wasn't the place. It was the toxic environment at the station that I just had to get out of there. And the quickest list, because I wanted to be an aircraft mechanic, but the list was 2 years long. I was like, I'm not staying here another 2 years.
2 years long to go across the river.
2 years long to even just go to school. So I was non-rate, right out of boot camp. I was like, I'm not gonna stay a non-rate for half my enlistment. I'm not a lifer. I'm doing this for 4 years. I'm getting out. And the quickest list was mechanic school. And having that mechanical background was so helpful and learning systems and understanding how to read diagrams and things like that. So I always encourage people who are trying to be pilots to get a little mechanical understanding before they start as well. So, I mean, it's all cross training. Like, the more you can learn, the better it's going to make you on both sides of the coin. So mechanics becoming pilots, or at least getting their PPL, or pilots going to the mechanics and saying, hey, can you show me what you're doing and explain it to me, so that also when I'm pre-flighting or when I'm writing stuff up, I know exactly what I'm writing up for you. And it's so beneficial for both sides. So that's awesome. Well, I know a great mentorship program you can find some pilots at to help you with your fixed wing journey.
Yeah, I've got to actually set up. I've got to actually set up a one-on-one eventually with one of the fixed wing.
A lot of people do. A lot of people, everyone's just been emailing each other and not doing the one-on-one sessions. I'm like, come on, guys, this is what it's supposed to be used for. Do the one-on-ones. Yeah, so thank you again for sharing your story. We'll probably keep the recording to like an hour so it doesn't take up like too much space on that. So if you want to stop the recording now, we can keep chatting for a little bit if you want, but awesome.